A very good morning, ma'am. Thank you so much for accepting the invitation for the Coast Guard podcast series, Chalk Between the Lines. Thank you. Welcome, ma'am.
Good morning, and thank you for having me this morning for the session. Thank you.
Really appreciate. Yes, I think today it's going to be exciting. We're going to discuss a couple of things, right? From trying to understand, your experiences about pedagogy, where you're coming from. It always reminds me about something I read about in Sherlock Holmes. I think there was one line where it described about how humans are this bundle of experiences as well. So it'd be really interesting to hear where you're coming from and also discuss about the current state of pedagogy in terms of how the acceleration of tech has completely changed pedagogy at the moment. So I think the couple of things that we're going to discuss. Begin with, ma'am, would love to hear your background, where you're coming from, and just everything about you and what brings you in the education space.
Right. So once again, thank you for inviting me session for this wonderful session this morning. Well, I've been into the teaching field for now nearly 24 to 25 years, and that's quite a big time. And I've seen an entire generation pass through the schooling years. And of course, a lot has changed from back then in 2000 to now in 2025. A lot of changes have undergone. And one thing which I always feel that as a teacher, we have to be open minded to adapting things as per the timings. Yes, teaching was not the first thing in the cards when I was getting graduating and getting into the industry. But yes, today when I reflect back and if I have to really think hard that what could possibly have been another field for me, any of the career fields, I don't think I would have survived in any other field or would have had such a wonderful time as much I have enjoyed my entire teaching career, starting my journey as a teacher to, I've seen a complete cycle in the teaching field. In fact, I started as a science and mathematics teacher, moving to being a computers ICT teacher to taking on the leadership role in last couple of years. So yes, I can say it's a 360-degree journey in this field and a lot. Every single day, there is something that we learn, not only from what's happening in the industry, but a lot of learning happens from the students.
Yeah, thank you so much, ma'am, for that. I think that was very interesting to hear, where it all started, and also I think your understanding of how it. I think the last, I'm assuming, you've been there the last 20 years at the moment in the education field, but really heartening to hear how your journey from being a teacher to a principal. Would love to understand, was there a particular moment? I think our audience would love to really um, you know, really dive into that as well. Was there a moment, that drew you to education in the first place?
So I'll go backward to my school days. I've studied in Kendra Vidyalayas, and I'm very proud to be a KVite, where I think students from every walk of life they come, and the teachers also are from all over the country where they try. It's a good mix of traditional as well as there are a bunch of teachers who are on their own into a lot of professional development and they try out new teaching techniques and all that. So I'm very thankful to my teachers who gave us that open mindset of trying out things. And fast forward to having seen my journey as an educator in the field. Yes, back then in late 90s or early 2000, there was a good blend of the traditional teaching methods. And I was fortunate enough to have all the time worked in schools. As a teacher, I was given that freedom to bring in my own innovation, my creativity. And I'm a staunch believer that every individual is different. Every educator is different. How there are those standardized lesson plans, there are those standardized scheme of work which is provided by every single board. You name any curriculum and it's there. But how a teacher carries that to her classroom, because every classroom set of children, those 22, 24 set of students that you have, every individual is different. And how I curate, how I cater to my bunch of student is that magic which the teacher makes. So ask me what is that one best thing that I would want to reflect upon? I would say that I wish I was in the classroom teaching today, because today, with a lot of technology, the kind of transformation which technology is undergoing, the kind of tools as a teacher that we have in hand, I haven't seen that in last 2+ decades, right? So yes, I try to seize every moment to be in the class and to utilize that, because children really are very fast learners. They adopt technologies even faster than the adults. So we just have, and that's one reason. A little about my school curriculum. We are into Cambridge curriculum, where our children are encouraged a lot into critical thinking and application-based learning, which happens. So children are very sharp, and you just have to facilitate them, and they will do wonders.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting to hear that perspective. And also super exciting to hear that, like you are so certain about the education space, like even to begin with. On that note, ma'am, would love to understand more about your school, that you're heading, PNC Cognition, a bit of introduction about that. I think that'll be really, really helpful.
So PNC Cognition, we are a Cambridge school. There's ICSE branch as well. I'm heading the Cambridge department, and we are into the 9th academic year of the school. I have joined the school in last 2 years, and the school comes with a very growth mindset, as in we do not believe in having children only and only academically driven curriculum. We give we give our students a platform to explore. The motto of the school itself is explore, excel, and exceed, which tells you that we want our children to put our hands into whatever they like, whether it is sports, cultural, making certain innovations, or having their own initiative. So yes, and I think Cambridge curriculum is beautifully imbibed into the system, because the philosophy, the attributes of Cambridge itself is having the children to be very confident learners, making them responsible of their own actions. So we do have students who come up with social initiatives, taking up initiative for certain causes that they are. So that way, we are making them responsible for their own actions, taking those responsibilities. Also, one of the attributes is about reflective thinking, wherein I see our children at the end of, and it's not just academics, it is anything when we are having those discussions and the debates, or when they are coming with certain proposals, a lot of reflection that happens. Now, that is something which somewhere in the traditional form of teaching, we saw that reflection wasn't there. It was just about having finished the teaching of the certain curriculum or the topics, and there are those questions which you just, there's a race to complete those exercises and just finish with the so-called portions. Reflection really makes them think and apply those knowledge into their real life scenario.
That's super, super interesting. I think, as you mentioned, excel, empower, and there was another word that you mentioned.
Explore, excel, exceed.
Explore, excel, and exceed. That's phenomenal. I think it's beautifully encapsulated what PNC Cognition stands for. And I think you mentioned another aspect about the critical thinking and reflection being quite critical to PNC Cognition. And yeah, that just reminded me about how reflection is all about meta thinking, like just being aware about your thinking patterns. And that just becomes so important in this day and age, especially with the acceleration of technology. And that was a very good, overview of PNC Cognition. Really appreciate that, ma'am. If I may ask, ma'am, like for the audience, like this is PNC Cognition is for students from nursery till grade 10.
That's right. We're a pathway school, and we done Cambridge curriculum right from early years to A levels, which is grade 12.
Grade 12. Okay. And they're about like how many students starting over there?
We have about 750 students.
That's good. Yeah. So moving on, ma'am. So one of the things that we understand is as the head of a school, there are a lot many, like stakeholders involved. There are a lot many things that are happening in any given day. You're engaging with the teachers, you're with students. You're trying to like chart out the vision for the school for the next 5 years, 10 years. And there's a lot many things that as a leader that you go through in your school? How does a day look like in your shoes? And how do you balance like being a leader and then at the same time being present? If you could throw some light on that, would be really interesting to hear.
Well, I think that's a very reflective question for me as well. Um, Typically, I really like to interact with the students directly, and we've structured our curriculum in such a way that it's not just only academics. Yes, I would like to say that we are now quite academically focused school, but we give equal importance to whether it is curricular or it is co-curricular activities, everything. And what I believe is how I look at the wholesome school is we believe to give about 80% of time to the curricular and co-curricular, the holistic development of the child, and 20% to the academics when a child enters the school system. That is at the early years when the child is 3, 4, 5 years old. So we would want to know the wholesome picture of the child to build on that and give them exposure to a better sports or interpersonal skills and getting down doing learning by doing, whether it's playway or dance or theater or whatever it is. So 80% of time is spent for a child in the juniors, in their early years for that. And by a 10-point scale, we keep grading it up and the chart flips by the time the child reaches to A levels, that is a grade 12, is typically a 16, 17-year-old. And there it becomes 20% of the curricular and the co-curricular activities and 80% of academics. Because what happens is by the time the children are going to the higher grades, at the colleges, universities, even though we say that, yes, you need to have a complete, a wholesome picture of your profile now, which has been built, still, till today, there are colleges, not a lot of colleges, I would say almost all the colleges, there is a big weightage given to their academic scores. And hence it becomes that much more important to give that kind of rigor and time to academics as the children progress to the higher grades. So yes, I think that's how our curriculum shapes up. It looks like. Coming to me, how my day looks like. Yes, I am directly involved with looking into how the academic progression is happening. I also directly have interaction with my students because if I haven't heard directly from the students that a certain learning pedagogy that we as teachers, as educators have been trying out in school, it's not a complete cycle for me. As a teacher, I am an adult who has studied, who has graduated from the school or the education system about 20, 25 years back. We wouldn't want to carry the same style, the same pedagogies into the classroom today because we are talking about a lot of transformation, which now yearly or I can say monthly, there is so much of change, so much of upgrade which keeps happening. So as an educator, I cannot be carrying that staleness to the class. It has to be something which is very dynamic. And hence for me, the student feedback becomes very, very crucial. And I take that very seriously. Then, of course, to bridge the gap between how the children are expecting what they perceive, what they expect, what their understanding is, and what the educator is delivering inside the class. Now, to bridge the gap is a very fine line because the teachers, the educators, each one of us have our own style, how we would like to deliver the class. So as adults, we get a little rigid. So to bridge these two ends, and which are the two essential pillars of any education system. A school, you cannot visualize a school without teachers, without students, and these two are the key components of any education system. So as a leader, it becomes my role to connect these two, and so that the learning and teaching is happening effectively. Yes, sometimes a lot of it's not a very easy task because we are dealing with humans in both the ends. For me, what becomes very, very essential is to have this constant conversation and talk to my teachers, get them to have a growth mindset, to adopt professional development, which should not be a one-off. It has to be a continuous professional growth that they are having, to be adaptable to customize my style of teaching into something which is making more for my learners in the classroom. Yeah, I think that's what I would say.
That's really, really interesting to hear that. And I think you very well put it across, saying that teachers and students being the core elements of a school. Like without a teacher and without a student, like the institution of a school does not exist. And bridging those two like seamlessly is the role of a leader. And 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 ma'am, I think your emphasis on learning by doing, that is something you mentioned about PNC cognition. The Aristotelian way of doing things, where you learn by doing, was also something very interesting to make note of. And yeah, ma'am, so this is something like, if you were to just build on this, an extension of the question that I also wanted to understand is what is that one thing that people misunderstand about your role in generally speaking, when there's a lot that goes on? Is there any challenges that you face while being a leader?
Well, of course, a lot. Yes, I think today with information at the tip of finger, everyone has very easy access to all kinds of information. People are very well connected. We are living in a society where communication is good. Today, our mechanism of reaching out to people or seeking for certain information from the www, it's just a click away. But there's a flip side to it also, because uh, there are those networks which are unofficial groups which people form. A lot of times, miscommunication also happens. The expectation from people is sometimes way high, and everybody sometimes have an expectation. They have their own opinion to a certain thing, and they would expect it to be customized as per an individual's need. Now, for a school organization which is so large, they cannot be customized plans, and hence as an organization, we have all the time making those decisions, which is in the best interest of the entire school community. And there again, the prime is the students, because a school is for the students. So hence, keeping them in mind when a decision is made. So yes, there are those moments when people do not understand, and it's difficult to cater to individual needs. A major misconception about my roles and not responsibilities, of course. What do I do as a principal in school? There was something very interesting which came once, and who told me that as a principal, what do you do? You sit in the AC cabin and you're having coffee in the AC cabin. So that's how a large mass of people look at the principal's job, that they are in an AC cabin having coffee.
Yeah, yeah, I think that personal experience of yours says a lot. I think it also there's so much to like declarify, if you will, right? And that makes it even more clear that the role of a principal, a school leader, is just not about sitting in AC cabins, but there's so much that goes behind just like seamlessly, like, to use your own words, bridging that gap between teachers and students, and trying to make sure that every element in a school that really goes well. On that note, ma'am, like, we see that in today's times, there have been like this exponential acceleration of tech. And we've been seeing so there's this author called Carlota Paredes. So she talks about, the technological revolutions that have happened in the past, and how there've been like these same underlying principles in all of these technological revolutions, right? Back in the 2000s, it was the dot-com bust, right? The dot-com bubble. And then right after that, early 2011s, you had the people started making apps. And then after that came the Bitcoin phase. And then now it's the AI phase. Most thinkers from a long period of time, each of these technological revolutions have been saying that this is the age of this, and hence you need to become comp-proof, or this is the age of YouTube, you need to become YouTube-proof, and this is the age of Bitcoin, and so on and so forth. And you've been seeing that there've been a lot many conversations today, especially around how AI is able to do everything, and none of the propositions, right, to even think about, if AI can do everything, what is it that we humans do? Like, and by 2029, you have like some great thinkers talking about, um, how knowledge economy is going to be then, and so on and so forth. And it's a bit scary to even like come across these articles, right? So I wondered, like, what do you think like a school should look like in 2030, considering all of this that's happening at the moment?
So here's something which I would like to say. So all this technological revolution that you mentioned, whether it was this whole thing of .com or app building or the Bitcoin phase or the YouTube generation or the AI, we've been there, right? And every time there was this whole fear that will there be a need of teacher? Yes, yeah, here we are. We are there.
Yeah.
We are very much there, and we are going to remain there, right? What is important, I'm circling back to something where we started our conversation, that as a teacher, as an educator, it's very important that we keep upgrading ourselves, keep learning. We have to adopt the upcoming technologies and take it forward into our classroom and use the technology. It's not that the technology uses us. We have to be using the technology into the classroom. And why I say that so firmly is because the children who are coming, they are born with these technologies. So they understand only that language. Now, for us as adults, we have to learn that. It's an effort that we have to put into learn and use that, because we are somewhere calibrating our language to their language to make them understand and use it as a tool to escalate our learning chart, our learning graph. And I think the earlier a teacher understands this, that I need to learn and grow with technology, take it to my classroom, it should become a tool which is going to aid my teaching to enhance the learning in the classroom. Now, if that anyone comes with that kind of mindset into the teaching field, it's a cakewalk. I don't think when I started teaching, it was a very simple teaching format. Here's a textbook, here are the notebooks, here's your classroom, there is a chalkboard. I don't think there was even, I think it was only by the second or the third year of my teaching when I started using projector in the class. Okay, so those good old days when there was a PC and projector connected to it, I started from there. Today, when the classrooms are smart classrooms. So I think very, very essential. I'm reiterating this over and over, that the teacher has to adopt that and use that inside the classroom. Now, fast forward to 2030, just about 4 or 5 years from where we are today, the teacher is still going to remain in the class. The technologies will change. The format might change. Assessment pattern might probably change, right? From to the paper and pencil, which is still there. It might transform into a digital assessment. A lot of us during the COVID times, during the pandemic, there was a need and everybody adopted. So today, digital learning is not something which is only on papers or it's in the web world. No, it's happening. LMS, which was introduced to the entire world, I would say about 85% of the schools who were not dependent, who did not, probably some of them had not even heard the term of everybody, rose up to that whole situation. They were all using it. Education happened, learning happened for 2 continuous years, and it's there. So one good thing that happened was that whole transformation about people learning, adopting these new technologies has already happened and it's there. Now, how
100%.
are we taking it forward? Yes, a lot of places where digital assessments have come into the system, but not 100%. It's adopted for about, I would say about 20-30% of the segment has adopted the digital assessment. There are trials and errors which are being made. But yes, now the students today who are there in the school, they have learned it beautifully and they work seamlessly with that. But I think it is again the adults who want to have that kind of hybrid model of, I want my paper pencil, I want the chalk and duster, I want the whiteboard and the marker along with my smart classroom. And there is a two sides to the coin always. So there is something which is good about certain mode of traditional teaching also, in terms of when there is a chalkboard or a whiteboard being used alongside a smart classroom, it has its own benefit, because the kind of attention span that you can seek from the students, including the good tools of the smart systems, whether it's an interactive board or a projector, whatever technology the teacher is using, or even if it's certain AI tools which is being used in the classroom, to seek that kind of attention of the student in the classroom, a good mix of both the technologies is really helping. Now, when we fast forward, when we talk of 2030 or even years after that, it is only the tools which probably are going to change. Connect of the teacher, the rapport between a teacher and the student, right? That is still going to remain there, because whatever tools you use, they are not tapping into that human connection between the child and whether you say the machine or the
Mhm.
teacher. So inside a classroom, technological tools, the teaching aids might look a little different, but the teacher will still remain there.
Very beautifully put across, ma'am. Yeah, I think there's so many things that you touched upon in just this one question, right? And and yeah, I think very well put across. Recently, I was engaging with some material by Anderson Horowitz. It's a venture capital firm in the United States, and there was one of these tech companies that's having a conversation with, and then they go about saying that, we've been in this space for the last 10 years, and you know for sure that in the next 25 years, teachers are not going to be replaced. Like, I mean, they're going to be there even after that. So, teacher in itself, being essential to a school, as you very well put across, that's going to be so fundamental, even with regardless of whatever technologies that come about. And yeah, I think that entire presence that the teacher brings in and the experience that the teacher brings in, the emotional connect, like you mentioned, that is 100%, going to be a very important thing in times to come as well. And yeah, I think, like you said as well, like most of these students who are coming in, into the class today, they're being born with these technologies, and basically they're the digital natives, right? And I think they get adapted to it. But at the core, like teacher, it becomes important. You also mentioned, ma'am, like this one thing, regardless. I mean, there have been like so many technologies that have come about. And yeah, I think the fundamental nature of the education system has been the same. But there have been like these like lot many researchers or like thinkers out there have been saying, yes, like there have been like different technologies that came about, but AI in itself is almost akin to like fire being invented for the first time. And this is going to like radically like change the trajectory of the economy and so on and so forth. Considering that, like, I think you also touched on one point of learning by doing, which is very interesting. One of the propositions at Coast Guard is, in this day and age, one of the things that becomes important is experiential learning. And I think you very well, like touched upon that by saying that, your school focuses on learning by doing as well.
So one thing which I would like to add here is, when we are talking about AI inside the classroom today, the beauty is that unlike the earlier times when the child had to actually, or even our good old days when we had to go to the library and pull out some hundreds of books to do a research and present a paper. Yes, after that came a generation when there was www, and you had to go online, make the search. Search became easy. So I'm sure that I, as an educator, and even my peers, or some even after my generation who have experience, that we all the time say that, "Oh, wow, what lovely work, what an amazing research work that these children are producing," and we hardly get anything, because it is the accessibility to the information that these children had. And today's generation, when I have these students who have AI at their fingertips and they are using it so easily, so beautifully, they are using it, is the learning curve is even much faster or much better than what we were. So I think those mundane jobs, or spending a lot of time in just searching, flipping through the papers, or browsing through 10 different websites to seek for one piece of information or one piece of data, I think that much time is narrowed down, and they are using it even more effectively. So their research that they are doing is, I would say, X as compared to what we were doing back then. And why not, when there is a technology where, and this is the benefit of technology, which I think everyone, students, teachers, grown-ups, everyone must exploit. And that's when we are putting the technology to use.
Very beautifully said, ma'am. Very beautifully said. This was reminding me about, for some reason, I was just reminded about Jane Eyre. Like, there's this classical English fiction book of, I think, in the 18th century, by Charlie Bront. And then there's this character in that called Jane, and she's an orphan, and her parents pass away, and so she starts staying with her uncle, and then the uncle passes away as well, and then she's now been given to her aunt, and the aunt has kids as well, and then it turns out the aunt is being rude to Jane, and there's this catharsis moment that she has, like, at one point, because she's been giving preferential her children are being given preferential treatment over Jane. So she has this catharsis moment, and then she says that, Aunt Jane, like me as a child, I'm so small. There's so many things that I experience, and I'm not able to articulate. But I wouldn't deny the fact that what I'm going through is really intense. So what that made me realize that I'm just tying this entire scenario to a child today who comes to school, in a specific context, right? And that context being, today students have these polymath in their pockets, right? Like, for example, any question that anyone asks them, they could perhaps go to ChatGPT and then be like, "Hey, I'm an eighth grade student, and this is what the question is about. Can you give me the answer to it, or just give me an understanding of how this works?" And it would give you and it would explain you in like multiple ways, to a point that even if you ask it a million questions, it's going to answer you back. And so it's almost akin to like a modern day language calculator, right? And the student gets answer to any of the questions that he or she has. And now I was just wondering, ma'am, like, when a student comes to the school, they almost have this feeling. I'm inclined to think that is right. They almost have this feeling that I basically know everything, or basically I can get answers to every question that I have, or if I want to learn anything. But why am I coming to school? Do you think that may be a question in today's that's how a student might be feeling when they come to school, and maybe they're not able to articulate. Do you think that might be something that might be going on in their heads? On that note, just wanted to understand, learner does the world need now?
Okay, you've touched upon a couple of things here. I'll come to the last part of the question a little later. The first part that you mentioned about the story that you mentioned about Jane, which is true. I have personally seen, especially after the pandemic, that we know a lot of lives were gone, and some of the children were really hit very hard by the circumstances around them, about um, the families or the relatives or the very close members. Now, even though that ChatGPT, OpenAI was there around that time. Children came back with that technology in the hands. I do not think that the technology was able to tap that kind of social, emotional quotient of the child, which was needed back then much more than any of the times. So the teacher was the one who actually tapped. So we have personally seen some of the cases where children have lost their parents, and very bright students. They are really sharp, but it's not just about the information or the knowledge at that time. That human connect, that emotions which the child was undergoing. There's so much of, and I'm talking about school children who are between the age of 3 and 17, such a tender age. And it's a big thing losing parents. So they were emotionally disturbed. And some of the cases, they do not want to open up. It takes a whole lot of time to build that kind of rapport between the teacher and the student, to tap that connect. And it may not happen. Maybe there are about 7 to 10 teachers who visit the class, but it might be that one teacher alone who has built that kind of rapport with the child. And then to take things from there to forward and help this child in setting him, making a route, or addressing his social emotional needs, to make sure, yes, a teacher cannot become a parent. But what does the child need at that age is just that human connect. Someone to cajole the child that, okay, fine, it's all right, it's okay. Few marks here and there is all right, but you need to make a life for yourself, right? So that kind of warmth, that kind of connect, that kind of relation, only a teacher was able to provide, which, while there is so much that AI is doing, I do not think that any of the technology could do that. And this is what I'm saying, that it's going to remain forever and ever. It's not going away. Moving to the second part of when you talk about the children today, do the students today feel the learner feels empowered that I have it at the tip of my finger. So why do I need to come to classroom? Yes, definitely. The child feels so empowered today, though many of the learners, when they are, you give them a project, you give them an assignment, you give them a task, the body language is very confident. And I think it is important for the teacher to also understand and get into the conversation with the student to have the debates and the discussion, because that the technology is not doing. Right? We allow them, when we are giving them these prompts, when we are giving them the research questions, they can do all the research from home. They can curate the papers. They can make all of that and come. But in classroom discussion is which has to come from HI, that is the human intelligence. Their AI does not step in. I'm again and again repeating that we have to take both the things along with. And that's when we're going to see that our students are really going to do very, very well. Children who come with a thought process. We are seeing that for when it comes to the homeworks and assignment, that young children, as old as 5, 6, 7 years, confidently using ChatGPT. Very, very confidently for the simple homework. We do not want them to be dependent so much on the technology that even small things. So recently I was reading an article somewhere where I came across that simple calculations. So when you do, we have to, it was, even though we all came from a phase where there was so much of emphasis on Bloom's taxonomy, and it is still in teaching and learning that we use. A lot of importance earlier was given just on memorization. There came a phase where we started outsourcing the memorization part to devices, things which a device can remember for me. I outsource that and I take my learning, my understanding, my application to the next level by outsourcing the memorization part. The simple job of saving data into an external device. Now, there is some amount of importance to that memorization, and that is why it was Bloom's taxonomy had the pyramid which was there. Simple calculation. When I say 5 into 10, the moment I'm saying 5 into 10, you already have a picture in your mind. Okay. If I had to outsource that information to a device of typing, and there was a typo, there was one additional zero. Okay. And when I'm telling you 15 to 10, you already know that the result which is going to come is something in 3 digits. I'm just giving you a simple example. Now, if I had from my childhood, 3-year-old itself, when there was those importance in learning rhymes, is a beautiful thing. You do not want to outsource that, because that is where your linguistic development, the language building is happening at that stage. Why do we teach rhymes? Well, rhymes is there from age old. I don't have data for that. Is it 100 years old, 200 years old, 500 years old? I cannot quote on that, but it has a beauty that the children are understanding rhythm, they are appreciating music, the word building is happening, there's action happening, they're rejoicing, they're enjoying. So there's so much of a brain development at that age which is happening. There's a lot of cognition which has been done beautifully at that stage of the child development. Now, if those times tables are not introduced at that stage, and a calculator or a device is handed over to the child when they are 3, 4, 5, very young, the child is never going to know that the difference between a 50 into 10 and a 5 into 10, whether the result is to be expected in a 2-digit or a 3-digit. Now, that much mental calculation, all of us, we are not talking about precision here. We are just talking about an estimation. It is a life skill. So again, we have to introduce a blend of AI and the human intelligence.
Very well put across, ma'am. I think super interesting that way. That I think a couple of things come to mind, ma'am. Do you think, based on what we just discussed, as to like how a teacher then becomes so crucial, right, as you said, to the entire ecosystem of the education sector itself? Do you think the world today, like requires a different learner? Do you think is there, or does it remain the same? Do we need a different learner today? What kind of a learner do we need in this day and age?
Okay. Now, this is something that I, having seen so many students since 2000 now, one thing is what I strongly believe, that students are students. The basic nature of a student has not changed. And I'm not just saying, giving you a statistics or my understanding of a certain area. I'm saying from different schools to schools, or even in our country. I've done a kind of conversation with multiple students from across the states as well, or not only states, I would say, if I had to compare between a Delhi and a Bangalore, or any region specific also. Students are students wherever they are. They are very inquisitive. They want to know. There is, by default, there is a hunger for learning. They want to know things. It is us, the educators, it is in our hands how well we plate it and serve it to them. It's about that. So the child back then also came to school with this whole question in the mind. Let's see what's special, what's in store today in the classroom. What's the teacher going to do? Okay. Today also it's the same thing. It's just that the method, the style, the format, the expectations are a little different in terms of the fashion. The inquisitiveness is still there. They're still coming to school. That respect for the teacher is still there. There is still a curriculum, right? There is still that assessment. So the format in totality overall remains to be the same. That respect, the belief system in the school, the belief in the teacher is still there, right? That hasn't changed, and that is not going to change. That is still going to remain. And that is the beauty of the field of teaching and learning as compared to any of the other sectors. So it is upon the teacher to see that you learn, you upgrade yourself at all times. Try to see that don't confine yourself. And I'm very glad that in one of the workshops back then, when I was a young teacher and I was just starting my formative years into school, someone had shared this in one of the workshop training sessions. She quoted beautifully, this trainer, that how her chemistry teacher, how she had taught her in the classroom, was she brought the notes of her professor into the class to give them those notes. She has diligently taken all those notes and she has handed over the same notes to the next generation.
Wow.
Now, can you see, for about 30, 35 years, nothing has
Amazing.
changed. Nothing has changed. Now, today, when we are discussing this, can you and I come to a common consensus that even in chemistry, which is a very theoretical topic, of course, there are those lab sessions and the style and the methodology and all that is there. The concept system remain the same. But don't we think that there would have been any change? Could the teacher have not changed the style of the question or the format, the way she takes it forward, those same concepts? So the atom molecules, the basic elements are not changing. That's still to me the same. But are we teaching in the same format as we were taught back then during our school days? Now, if I have done that, if I have not tried to make any change in my teaching style from how I was taught to how I am going to teach to the next generation, then I don't think we are doing something right. There's something majorly missing in that case.
Amazing, amazing, right? Yeah, I think very well put across, ma'am. I think teachers then just become so crucial to this entire aspect of the classroom, right? And also at this very time, I'm just reminded about this poet called John Baldwin, and then he says how a classroom becomes important with both the students and the teacher, and he says something to this effect that he says that you have these, like different students out there in the same class with different attributes, right? You might find one student who is very courageous, or another student might be very creative. Another student might be really good at art and music. And all of these different students, like different experiences coming under one roof. And then he says that, if you find someone creative, right, in your classroom, you might just want to go and like spend time with them so that you can absorb that trait with you. And also at the same time, the job of a teacher then, like becomes to identify, these different traits of these different students and help them, like absorb from each other. And which is why I think, like you said, the format remains the same, and the experiences as well. Very interesting that you mentioned. And I was really impressed when you said how this one teacher like took the chemistry notes of another generation and gave it to another generation altogether. Says that these things remain intact and are not going to be like taken away like anytime soon. At least the human mind cannot foresee it, because human experience in itself is so crucial, regardless of how technology, accelerates. Yeah, I think, ma'am, you mentioned about, learning by doing, right? And, like one of these core propositions that I've been thinking about for the last, at least since 2022, is that if AI can do everything, what do like students then go and learn in school? And I think you did cover like almost all of it, right? And there's just one element that like comes to my mind, and I think you as well touched upon it. Um, so when I was, like really ruminating over this as to how does a child who comes to school today, how can he or she be relevant in a couple of years from now in this economy? And I was like, okay, AI is able to do everything. Then what then AI cannot do is execution, right? And how execution then becomes an important skill for students to learn, so on and so forth. At PNC Cognition Show, you mentioned that learning by doing is something very crucial to the school itself. Would love to hear you unpack that for our listeners as well.
So, yes, I truly believe that children must be given chance. The teacher has to build scope where they can see the value in whatever they learn by doing it. Okay. And now this is my personal experience. I was a bio student during my school days. I come from the time when dissection was allowed in the schools. And we've done dissection for various audit systems and things like that. I've done those section cuttings in biology class in the bio lab with, scraping our finger to make the finest slide in the lab. But where am I using that skill today? Is one question which very often keeps coming to my mind. And hence, it was very important for me I have this conversation all the time with my team of teachers that whatever we teach them, it has to be meaningful. They need to see a value of it. They have to be able to relate it to the real life. Let's not teach them just for the sake of getting marks. If my student knows a concept, has understood the concept, is able to apply that to the real life scenario, that is true learning. And marks will automatically follow. If I know the concept, I'm able to apply it anyway. So that's just going to follow. Now, something very interesting I had done back then when I was teaching in the classroom, when augmented reality was the new thing. It was up, and I was teaching computer science to my students. I was quite excited. And you rightly said there was this whole time of app development. It is around that time. I may not be able to exactly quote whether it was 2011, but something between 2011 and 2014 is the time that I'm talking about, the time when Pokemon Go was released.
I
And
see.
it was not launched, it was a new thing. So we had to download an API and try that way. I experimented that and I had fun playing with that. So
Wow.
much so that I carried the mobile to the classroom to show it to my students. My students did that. Now fast forward, because I gave them that platform to play around with it and experiment with it. I did not have to do much of talking. So they saw it, right? What
Wow.
augmented reality was. And it so happened that the following year, the students had a question. It was not there in the portions in the so-called syllabus. It wasn't there. And the question was there in the exam, in the board exam. Now, because these children had played with it, they had experimented, they were able to relate the concept that how in real world it can possibly be used. They had fidgeted around with that. Everybody else in the educators forum were discussing out of syllabus and this, that, all that. I was very happy because my student had done it. They had actually done it. They had experimented. They knew exactly what it was. Now, from then to now, I continue because I'm a firm believer of that. And that is why here at PNC, this is something that I keep requesting my teachers also. Anything that you teach to your students. So when you're teaching them, we do a lot of collaborative studies with respect to the teachers teaching in a particular grade. They come together to discuss if there is any commonality that they might have. There was one time when the mathematics teacher was teaching them time, and the science teacher happened to talk about shadow. They came on the ground to make a sundial and understand the movement of the shadow according to the time. Yes, it may not be all the time possible to take them to Jantar Mantar because we are here in Bangalore, but to create a sundial. So you are teaching them. Now, similarly, in our younger grades, when children are learning about how to handle money, and this is I'm talking about early years children, they set up a little market, and with that, it was not about just one subject or a concept. There was so much learning which was happening. They were having this language communication in Hindi, in Kannada, in English. They set up a little marketplace. They invited the parents. They were talking to the farmer. They were buying vegetables. So it was learning the names of the vegetables, learning the names of the fruits, and using those terms in uh, cash handling. So they were doing mental mathematics was happening there. So for me, this is learning by doing. Same thing happens in most of the science and mathematics topics where they experiment with the concept so that the learning is ingrained. They've understood because they have done or a role play. A lot of times the students are doing role play. We also started maker space where the students are making their inventions. And I want to say that every single grade, every single child is able to create something. No, not always possible. Like the famous Thomas Alva Edison, it was 100 times when he failed. So there are those failures also, but in every failure there is a learning that's happening. They are learning so many ways how it does not happen, but it's not just about that, because if in a set of 22 students or 5 students, if there are about 2-3 students who have come up with their innovation, they have inspired all the others. And
100%.
it's a cycle that we see that the others want to make, they want to try out making new things. So, yes, learning by doing is something which we have that right from the very young kids, and it goes on till the highest level of grade.
Heartwarming to hear that. Like on one end, like these fundamental aspects of the education itself, like, that embody human experience, like the teacher, the student, and also at the same time, like learning by doing, being also the core of VNC Cognition. Really heartwarming to hear that, how that's seamlessly bridged. Do you think what or rather, what parts of schools do you think are overestimated in this day and age, or maybe like which parts of the school do you think like are not valued enough?
Not valued enough.
Yeah.
Okay. In general, I would say that even though we have progressed, we've moved a long way from just believing in getting, academically driven schools. A big part which was missed out somehow was sports and the other activities. There wasn't so much importance given. Yes, from then to now, things have changed dramatically. But I would still say it's not as much as it could be. The simple reason would probably be that a lot of colleges still are heavily dependent not just on the profile of the child, but the core still remains to be the marks. And that is an irony of the system. Now, I wish that we lived in a system where if a child was passionate about any one particular field, whether it is sports or cultural or scientifically driven or linguist, someone who is into that, and if it was their profiles which were given a heavier weightage when it came to the college applications in comparison to the marks that they obtain in certain grades. And that too, it's only the board classes, not the entire academic journey of the student over a period of time. It's not that. It's just the marks dependent on a particular year. Now, why I'm saying that is sometimes on that particular day, on the day of the exam, child was not in the best of the mood. We do not know what the conditions were at home or the circumstances that he or she might be going or the health conditions. Reasons could be any. So why are we still so much dependent on those standardized tests, and that too just based on that one day, one exam score, rather than a holistic picture of the child for a period of time. So this is it. There is some trust.
I've not thought about that in a long time. Although like there's this understanding that okay, exams are a bit uncomfortable as a student, right? Like that's how I've experienced it. But yes, I think it it just like gives a fresh perspective when you think that okay, it's just that one day and then your entire identity is marked on that, like, and you're gauged and you put into that hierarchy of blocks out there. And that makes
And for that matter of fact, you and I have lived and have been part of that system. Do you really think the difference of 1 mark should change your grade? You know, you are at 89 and I'm at, let's say I'm at 89 and you're at 90. Okay, you're getting an A and I'm getting a B. How fair is that?
rightly so. On that note, like, do you think in this age of AI, do you think assessments need to like maybe change a bit, or like, or do you think like they might have to change altogether in terms of how assessments are done?
Uh,
Agreed
yes,
that
definitely.
there is a certain way that the Cambridge syllabus, like maybe, or the board, like wants the assessments to be done. But I think considering the changes, do you think like there needs to be a small shift, perhaps?
Yeah, I'm not going to comment about a particular board's assessment pattern because every board undergoes a whole lot of, no, you know, there's a rigor, there's a lot of discussions, sessions which happen, research which happens, and only then they come up with a certain capsule and a certain method that the assessment, and everyone puts in a lot of effort in curate because ultimately they also have to be fair. There has to be a standardization in how the learners are going to be marked. It has to be fair system as well. So, but a wishful thinking is that I can make,
Hmm.
and I can at least propose here in this forum that I wish that children, when they are to be assessed, number one, it should not be based on just 1 day's test. It should not be heavily dependent on the score based on that 1 day exam. It possibly can give them allow them to use technology because they are today powered by AI. So let them use that. But let the students do research, put in a lot of effort, get them those open-ended questions where they can do a research and not again dependent on 1 day, one sitting. It can be over a period of time. Let them come back with their own hypothesis. Come, propose that and give a research-based uh, assignment over a period of time, and that could have a higher weightage as compared to the standardized testing. Yes, some extent standardized testing is needed. I'm not taking that away completely, but reduce the weightage of that. And rather moving forward, because today we all have access to technology, there is AI which is there, exploit that feature and get them into doing research. And their admissions into the colleges can be based on the kind of work that children have done, based on the kind of profile that they have exhibited over a period of time, rather than just. So suddenly you see that a lot of children, they start working on the profile building only when they are in grade 12. And that's not how it should be. That is not their passion. It is, we are somehow forcing them. Our system is forcing them to do something like this.
Very well put across, ma'am. I think it was one of the heads of one, or I think it was one of these institutions that I was speaking to, and they're like how even these exams that come about, which standard grading, they become so important, especially because it teaches in a lot of discipline as well. And honestly, like having been to the UK for my master's, and I realized that Indians like you come with great tenacity in terms of like, acing all the exams over there. And part of the reason is because I think the standardized form of testing that used to happen, like I think used to test our metal in India to greater heights. And that made it like phenomenally easier, like for most of us that, things just used to become much easier. So I think there is, like you said, it is needed as well, and it is important. Yes, ma'am. Do you think, there are these 8-hour school days that happen, and Do you think they're still serving us, or what are your thoughts on that?
Half 7 hours of school. It is 1/4 of the active. I would no say it is 50% of the active hours of the child being spent in school. School is one place where I think timely they get these vacations as well, and which is fine as long as this every school is able to strike a right balance between academics and non-academics. Now, again, the kind of activities which happens in school, whether it is the reading program or the special assemblies or the sports and the dance and the music and the theaters and the libraries, or they going out in the garden for their nature walk, or anything for that matter besides not besides alongside academics, it can happen only in school. As a parent, does the parent have that kind of scope, knowing that all parents today are so busy with the work, the kind of lifestyle that we all live in? Does the parent have that kind of scope to give a good amount of balance between academics and all other activities, hobbies and sports and fitness and everything, or mental wellness? I doubt, right? And hence, it becomes important that uh, so 6-7 hours of schooling is just right, provided the schools are within that 6-7 hours also doing a good mix of various activities rather than just focusing only and only on academics. So here at PNC, what we do, what I mentioned sometime at the start of our talk was that in our junior classes, if you see, a lot of movement and activities and playway and other co-curricular activities, they are not stationed on their furniture throughout the day. 80% of the time, it is some or the other activities where the children are moving. And it's 20%, again, not at a stretch, a staggered manner where they are doing academic work. And as they're progressing, we bring in about 10% shift as they move to the higher grades. Now, as long as every school can do that kind of balance between their physical activities, their hobbies, their passion, teaching them something new, taking up these social initiatives that they want to do it, giving back to the society, all of that, I think it's a win-win situation for both parents and the schools.
I think very beautifully put across. Yeah, we have these questions, right? But I think when you broke that down, like it made so much sense. Like we have these questions. Okay, there's new acceleration of tech, and do you think like 8 hours of school or 6-7 hours of school is that necessary and things like that? But when you I think unpack that, I think it just becomes so easier to understand that it's just not about a very productive sense of learning. It's more of a holistic sense of learning that needs to happen. And when we just look at learning as uh, input, you give some input and then you get back some output from the student, then I think it just becomes a very mechanical form of learning, right? And the identity of a student then just does not come up in like all its glory. So I think when we look at so many extracurricular activities happening in a school, and a lot of this actually, if you were to think about it, it definitely does shapes the identity of a student, and I totally concur with that. I think that made so much of sense. I'm going back to your earlier, your thought on school leader bridging that gap between teachers and students, and that's something I think is just like ringing a bell. After like trying to bridge that gap, I'm during or in the process of bridging that gap, what pain points have you, like come about of a teacher? Like what does a teacher, like struggle with? Like what in terms of, like delivering her part of the play? Like what does she struggle with? What does he or she struggle with being a teacher?
So most of the times when I see the teachers struggle is one, I would say, is the time constraint. And if my team of teachers happen to hear this podcast, they will be able to relate to what I keep discussing with them, that anywhere in the world, it is 24 hours a day and 365 days in a year. It is upon us how well we plan it, how well we structure it, and we execute it in the class. So it's about time management. Now, can ever in a school setup we say that 1 month we will do all activities and the remaining 9 months we're going to only teach. Can we ever do that? The answer clearly isn't. Have to be very cognizant of the fact that all these things have to move alongside. Parallelly, it has to happen. So as a smart teacher, I need to structure, I need to plan my academic calendar in such a way that I know my students, I know their learning curve, how much they're able to take, and do a good justice to the teaching pace and alongside managing their emotional needs as well. Because they will never have that kind of luxury of saying that, okay, this month only activities, this month only academics. We never have that kind of luxury. So, and every teacher can devise her teaching. I know the topics which I have to teach, whatever the concepts are, and how well my students are in a position to understand it and take it. Okay. There are certain topics in every, and I'm not just saying in a particular curriculum. Now I talk about all the curriculums across the globe, right? There are those easy topics, there are the more complex topics, and then there are those sophisticated topics. The easy ones, it's okay to give it out to the students. Just do your checks, to understand that all your learners are at the common learning standpoint. The complex ones, something where you need to initiate the conversation, you need to get the crux of the topic. Then today, use technology to understand back from your students how much they have. You spend your majority time in the very sophisticated topics because that's where your learners really and really need you. All the possible technologies or YouTube videos are not supporting enough. I might have watched several times a particular YouTube video on a certain concept and not understood that. But when a teacher does that in class, I understand it at one go. Okay, because there is that human connect. The teacher can actually break it down, can actually chunk it, can actually open the whole case study for me and curate it according to my requirement. So it is upon the teacher to make sure that she creates this learning plan for her batch and for a specific batch. What might work in year one batch may not essentially work with the next batch. Hence, it becomes very, very important to every time keep reviewing as per the requirement of your learners. So I think that's worked for me, and I'm quite confident that it should definitely work for most of the teachers.
That makes a lot of sense, man. Makes a lot of sense. I think time constraint, as you said, I think I can imagine because teachers like are dealing with so many kids at the same time, but so many other responsibilities and prep time and so many other things. It just like adds it a very healthy challenge. I should say that with them in terms of managing all of that. And yeah, like one thing that you mentioned that stood out was what would work with one batch might not work with another batch, because I think the other batch might have just come up with different experiences. They would have just absorbed like so many other experiences where they would require a very different form of learning altogether. And it's the job of a teacher to to come up with innovative ways to deliver the same content. That's so interesting to hear. Like, the points of discussion coming from one section is so different from another section, right? And that just shows the innate beauty of like human experience in itself, like how students perceive and how students think may be very different from each other. And that just adds to the beauty, right? And there's so many different perspectives. That's really heartening to hear, man. That's really super heartening to hear. Students having, like this absolute clarity in terms of what they are expecting. I mean, generally, we would assume that, students wouldn't know, what they want to be fed with or like what they want to be given and things like that. But I think this is very refreshing to hear that a student has that clarity innately as to what they're expecting, and teachers and the system in itself needs to like hold themselves in such a manner that they are able to deliver what needs to be delivered. Having this conversation with you, right from discussing about your journey, where it all started from, about PNC cognition, and that bridging the gap between teachers and students, so fundamental to the entire education system. As much as, like we would like to think, okay, things are changing and all of that, but these crucial aspects being so important as you mentioned, and so much more. But I'm just so grateful for your time. Thank you so much for joining us today.